Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge podcast. I'm your host, Ralph Benker. And as always, with me in the studio today, my co-host, Emil Ogier. Emil, welcome to The Edge.
Thanks, Ralph. Glad to have you back. You've been missed.
Yeah, we've had a bit of a hiatus. We've had some of our regular show listeners anxiously awaiting the next episode. So without further ado, here it is. And obviously, as ever, an absolute barnstorming lineup of news. I think the big single kind of news item this week probably dominated by Anthropic. They've actually had one of the most concentrated weeks of news out of any frontier lab since GPT-4 launched. So that's no small feat, but the top headline in terms of Anthropic, Andrej Karpathy has actually joined them. Andrej Karpathy, so he's got such a strangely spelt name with the J and the K, but hopefully I've said that in a beautiful way. But he is just one of these incredible influencers and maybe even kind of trendsetters in terms of AI education. And he has now joined Anthropic. So a little bit more on him later. Second bit of news, kind of interesting, is that Anthropic is about to post its first ever profitable quarter, which is absolutely incredible. This is going to be the envy of every frontier lab out there, especially I would say OpenAI and XAI. And so no doubt we'll be looking at some of those numbers and doing some comparisons with OpenAI as well on our brand new resource, which I will be giving people the details for. They can go to bleeding-edge-ai.vercel.app. So that's a bit of a resource that you can go in and take a look at all of our episode research, our articles, and our timeline. I will be showing that a little bit later. Our third news item, Sequoia has just also released some interesting write-up about the AI opportunity, and they think that the next $1 trillion company won't sell software. It will actually sell the work. Now, this isn't really a new concept. If you think about outsourcing, we've always had outsourcing businesses. Certainly, a lot of the Indian outsourcing companies have become enormous on the back of outsourcing. And the whole idea there is that they're selling work. But I think, we're now starting to see that actually the consulting companies are really organizing themselves around doing the work using AI. And that's kind of fascinating because it's, upending a little bit of the SaaS model. So yes, it's still technology, but they're selling outcomes, not selling seats. So watch this space on that. There's actually a source called the AI Opportunity, which is basically a consulting firm playbook as written by Sequoia. No doubt I'll be diving deeply into that one. And then the fourth news item, Google I/O. I don't know if you watched Google I/O, but they dropped something like 100 announcements. Some of it was a little bit underwhelming. Some of it was really cool. But I think if you kind of imagine that this update was spanning Gemini, AI mode in search, Android XR, Workspace, which is basically like their competitor to Microsoft for desktop publishing, Vertex, and a whole range of developer tooling. So Vertex is obviously their kind of AI capability. And I guess the big story there is just the sheer depth and breadth of the scope of tools that they have been releasing. So there's no doubt that, Google is not behind in any way. They are really leading across the piece. And of course, Google is pretty much last man standing. If you kind of think about the video capability, yes, some of the Chinese models have continued to forge ahead there, but certainly OpenAI have stood down their video capability. Anthropic never went there. And so interesting to see that Google I/O has just kind of blown us away in terms of the absolute scope of what they released. And then a bit of an interesting one, not something that we normally cover on the show, religion. So Pope Leo, he just published the Vatican's first AI encyclical, and it's actually co-presented with one of Anthropic's leads, a guy called Christopher Olah, and it's basically titled as The Holy See. So it's released its first encyclical letter on artificial intelligence. Interestingly enough, this guy, Christopher Olah, is the head of interpretability. So interpretability is how we understand what the AI has actually done. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as a concept as well. I'm going to do a slight deep dive on interpretability and why it really matters. But of course, it sounds like Pope Leo has given AI his official blessing. So we'll have to kind of get a little bit into what they've actually covered in there. But those are some of the big news items. I think I don't want to miss out on a couple of the releases, but we've also got Opus 4.8 Mythos. Presumably, they have toned it down because obviously Mythos made it in the news a few weeks back because it is so good at security and it was able to expose 0-day vulnerabilities left, right, and center. And this is now available to us. So there we go. I have tried actually to load 4.8 this morning, but it didn't come up in my Claude instance. So it's still rolling out, obviously. So watch this space. I have also got a bit of a deep dive on exactly what we should expect with 4.0. Another big release from Qwen. Qwen is Alibaba's LLM, and 3.7 is now out. Another big release from Google is the DeepMind co-scientist. I love the sound of this one. I absolutely can't wait to get my hands on it. I've written another deep dive research, or shall I say, I've instructed Claude to write some deep dive research on how we can go about using DeepMind's co-scientist. But it promises to be your fully fledged research partner. And then a couple of other really interesting stories. ByteDance have launched another kind of open source model called Lance, and Hugging Face. Hugging Face, I don't know if you've used Hugging Face, but Hugging Face is an absolutely fantastic resource where you can go in and find all kinds of open source AI technologies and download them. And they've actually got basically a robot that they're launching. It's called Le Robot, a humanoid, and they've actually launched some capabilities around that as well. So I definitely want to play with that robot. I haven't really made much inroads into kind of getting into physical AI in terms of robots, but that's definitely, such a big news story for 2026. So yeah, those are some of the big news stories. There's another 100 more, but I think those are the ones probably worth mentioning. Emil, as ever, what caught your eye on that roundup?
I just wanted to drill into Google I/O. I think, like you and others, just looking at the general sentiment, I was super excited for the announcement and I left somewhat underwhelmed. I don't think several things were thought through properly. Token spend specifically, I've been a Gemini Pro subscriber, and previous to this release, you could get 200 Nano Banana Pro images, 3 videos a day, and a very generous turn-based context window where you could work inside the web UI, work on code and not hit your thresholds quite comfortably. And I was actually doing a lot of good code there. As soon as the release came out, I jumped on the new video generated 2 images and blew through 80% of my 4 hourly session window. I know premiums were coming. I just wasn't expecting it to come to that degree, to the point I didn't feel like there was much utility. Maybe they've got their dialing wrong. I'm not sure. Maybe it was because of release, but I mean that's a lot of burn. I mean, to the point, if I need to work and create an image or one video, that locks me out for the session for the day. So yeah, I think they either need to get a little bit more generous on it, or find some middle ground. But as things stand right now, the Pro plan just feels like a taster more than something you can actually pragmatically work with if you're interested in media, which is the initial draw for me on that. And the other thing that I was really surprised by, the big key model release feature, was Gemini 3.1 Flash. And on their graph, it looked amazing. It even created its own new quadrant space when you factor in both intelligence and speed, comparable up to very close to, that of Opus and the latest models of ChatGPT, but it's 3 times faster, which is quite impressive. But the more I dug into it, I realized that one thing that they omitted from that graph was it is 3 times faster, but it's using 3 to 4 times the amount of tokens, which is a little bit crafty and underhanded as far as I'm concerned. And, they've done that with the Flash model. The whole point of the Flash model is it's supposed to be light. So I think maybe they need to retitle what the definition of Flash is. It'll be interesting to see what they do with the other 3.5 releases that come out. Yeah, I hope there's some more balancing in terms of token spend.
Well, I think we'll probably have Anthropic to blame for what we're seeing with Google, because they've seen people paying upwards of
Yeah,
€100 or £100, and in my case, something closer to €200 per month for a subscription. And of course, really, that's the market that everybody's after. So you can't make money on a £20 subscription. So what are they doing? They're trying to give you just enough to get you hooked on it, and then try to actually throw an enormous amount of value, so you actually do subscribe with a much bigger subscription. Uh, and obviously, we're seeing now with Anthropic actually being first quarter of trading profitably. I just think everybody's going to be going after that. We'll have to see what all of this means for the smaller developer. It does seem like Anthropic in particular, and we know definitely Microsoft and Google have been going after the enterprise customers. And so what we don't want, obviously, is for smaller players to be frozen out, but that may well come as well. I think we are looking at a tax here, an AI tax. We've spoken in the past about the tokenomics. A lot of what people are doing is actually, especially if you're in enterprise, you're not really working off a subscription with a certain amount of tokens allocated. You're actually working through the API, which means every single query that you run, every prompt that you run, every bit of interaction you have with the AI is costing you tokens. And some of those costs are escalating, incredibly quickly. And that is where the money is. And so subscriptions are just a way to hook you. So I'm not sure you're going to see much relief in the short term. Unfortunately, I hope you do. I think Google in particular have just got far too many tools to be, giving you such a low throughput. Otherwise, you just, really can't interact with their ecosystem sufficiently. So the other one that I wanted to just call out in terms of Google I/O is Spark. So Spark is Google's answer, obviously, to OpenClaw. It's essentially the automation model. And so probably now, I think in terms of mainstream automation, people will have heard of OpenClaw, probably have experimented with OpenClaw, and now they have Google Spark. And obviously, if you're in a Google ecosystem, which means if you're using basically Google Workspace, which is where if you've got a corporate account, you would have, the access to all of their desktop publishing slides and, tables and the like. If you have Spark, you can actually start running automation there. And obviously the automation within the email ecosystem is very exciting. And then the other one that is just blowing everything out of the water is obviously Hermes. And so Hermes is such an exciting one that I know my brother in particular is doing a lot of work on Hermes. He is also building his own local model because he doesn't want to pay the AI tax and the subscriptions, but he's also spent about $10,000 on building his own machine. But it does rather mean that he is able to sweat his Hermes automation without actually paying API fees. And so I hope that works out for him. Hopefully we'll get a bit of a case study on how he's faring on that. But I think, it's just a bit of an also ran in that sense by Google, which I think a lot of people are commenting on that, can't they extend this a bit further? Why aren't they really the leader in the space when it comes to automation? And, I just think the fact that they are really adding these capabilities, they don't actually have to be the leader. What they need to be is the company that integrates the most of these tools and makes them the easiest to use and the easiest to set up, and just makes them accessible for everyday users. And actually, I think, that is where they're gonna win more so even than Microsoft. But I think Microsoft are in the running there as well. And let's not forget Amazon. And so I think another story I want to touch on today also is the fact that you can now run Claude Code inside AWS. And there's some really interesting concepts about why you might do that. But before I gas on too much about those items, Emil, what have you got for us?
Before I dig into the first story, I just wanted to circle back on Hermes because I got caught up in the interest of it, and I went through quite a deep dive last weekend past. It really looks impressive, I must say, and the ethos of the people behind it, the creators, they've got a good mission statement. And in case you're not aware, it's gaining so much attraction. I think it's had more downloads, if not already, soon to be more GitHub pulls than even OpenClaw has done. And in addition to that, it's got a lot of things going for it that are quite unique. One thing I hadn't appreciated were the creators of Hermes had actually created it before OpenClaw. And when they got made aware of OpenClaw, when they took a look at it, their wording was, it's just like what we're working on, but it looks a little bit clunky, which I thought was quite interesting. But the thing that I'm finding really appealing is it's got this autonomous way of learning and getting better and knowing you and tuning into you without it naturally and autonomously builds context around you in a much smarter way than we've seen in previous models. So when you add that and the fact that many are citing on X that they're not getting the same headaches as OpenClaw, which is typically the main reason people are putting it down is, yes, it works well, but man, we didn't realize how much work was involved setting this up. And more specifically, looking after it and maintaining it. That whole philosophy of selling it as fully autonomous hasn't been the reality just yet. It does require hand holding. Interaction is still needed. You can get the autonomy, but just don't assume that you can walk away from it once you have it set up. And hopefully Hermes solves a lot of these teething problems that the first round of OpenClaw went through.
Yeah, and I think this is probably one of the most accessible, let's say, benefits of AI that everybody can access. Everybody has something that they can automate, and I think a lot of people are probably sitting there going, "Yes, but what? What can I automate?" So, what were you looking to automate, Emil? Give us a sense of the practical use cases that you've seen.
Yeah, the list is as long as your arm, is whatever you can think of. But just in terms of automating personal stuff using eyes on desktop computer use, just for all the mundane work, it would be nice to have that running on your own edge compute. It gives you the privacy shield you need, and you're not token maxing, you're not getting huge bills. And for the most part, I think a lot of the problems, a lot of the things people are trying to solve at home, those personal pain points, don't require the best models. I'm not convinced of it. I think we are at a stage now where using Opus 4.6 or ChatGPT 5.4 gets you does 80% of the work. I'm finding that aspect quite interesting. I think we've been so involved or interested in chasing the latest model now with harnesses breaking out and people realizing just how important they are, and more specifically routing your work to the correct model, not specifically choosing one model, but understanding what your workload looks like and understanding which model performs best for what particular task is the unlock. And this is where people are really finding true productivity gains.
Yeah, probably beyond most people to kind of start there and try and think what the best model is. I think, I often just leave a Claude on extra high. And that does mean that things actually do take a little bit longer. And I am actually getting into a bit more model switching. And with that in mind, even looking to implement a new harness, agentic harness capability that really does allow me to switch out to different models. Codex has been, touted as such a capable model, especially in terms of code reviews, but also in terms of coding. And we've got some really interesting stuff, obviously, coming out of China as well, with the likes of Alibaba with their Quen model. Obviously, DeepSeek was the one that's captured everybody's imagination about a year ago. But also GLM 5.5 from ZAI. So we're all incredibly capable models when it comes to coding. And so I think this is probably where we need to move next. And so I think that just kind of takes me to one of my deep dive kind of observations of the last few weeks. And that is basically being able to run a Claude Code on AWS. So this news broke about 3 weeks ago now. And essentially, what it means is you are able to install Claude Code in AWS and actually run it if you're an individual using your Claude Code subscription, which means you are basically using the allowed tokens as part of that subscription. You're not paying with the API credits. But for organizations, you can obviously also connect via API. And that means that every bit of interaction, you pay the prevailing rate for your tokens, depending on which model that you're actually using. So why might you do this? I think this is such an interesting concept. And if you think back a few episodes where we were having a conversation, why do people even need to actually build applications? Everybody's jumping on vibe coding, building apps. But if you just go into these LLMs, the LLM is already the app. It can already do everything that you are trying to build in your app. Perhaps, the app just becomes a little bit of an orchestrated and organized window of very specific narrow tasks for people that absolutely don't want to really open up a terminal window and use Claude. And so Claude code obviously will do absolutely anything. It is already a very capable agent. You don't need to go away and build agents. And so this is really the promise of basically loading Claude code into AWS. If you can think about it, essentially Claude is the agent. So don't build agents. Really just wire up Claude in that AWS. The advantage of doing it is that all of your data stays within your own AWS ecosystem, and none of it gets passed to the Anthropic servers. And so from an enterprise or from a security point of view, this is just really the next iteration, the next level. Obviously, the only other way of doing that is to run a local LLM. So to actually run a LLM installed on your own hardware. And that is, again, something that I see that will become more and more prevalent as costs increase. There is no doubt that it's going to become very attractive for people to be using their own local LLM. And I think, Emil, to your earlier point, if you don't need the best model, you just need some automation, then a local LLM is definitely something that I think a lot of people will benefit from. But for enterprise, I think this running Claude in AWS in the cloud and having that closed ecosystem so your data never actually leaves your ownership. Obviously, it's still in the cloud. So you have to trust AWS on sharing it in ways that you don't want. But clearly, I think this is a really interesting evolution, not only from the data security point of view, but just purely from the point of view that I think it brings us one step closer to why are you building an agent at all? All you really need to do is actually use the agentic capability of something like Claude Code, where you're maybe building a few structured skills and plugins and kind of wiring in your process and your data to Claude and actually just getting on with your agentic workflows in that way. Now, it's still early days. I think, whether it works exactly the way that I described, it's certainly been described that way to me. Certainly the research that I've done, it indicates this is how it is possible to make it work. I think it's really blurring the lines for me in terms of what we mean by an application. So do we really need applications? Do we really need to build agents? So if Claude is the application, any application, whether it's a CRM or an ERP or an accounting system, you just really need to educate the model in terms of the patterns and the guardrails. And you can do that with skills. You can do that with plugins. And you don't actually have to build anything at all. You're just telling it how you want it to operate. And that, I think, is going to really be a bit of a paradigm shift in what we mean by software. But I also think, just tying it back to that early story by Sequoia Capital and really kind of setting out the playbook for what the next $1 trillion business actually looks like, I think it is supported by this kind of framework. You've got absolute flexibility when you're only dealing with the LLM. You don't have hundreds of pages and business logic all predefined sitting in layers and layers of code. It's actually sitting in layers of configuration and instruction that a human can actually interact with, that they can actually read. And so, in theory, for me, I think it really collapses the accessibility and actually kind of, punches vibe coding in the gut as well, because you're really just giving the machine human readable instruction and it's able to go away and be whatever application you want it to be and actually process the results. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I just thought that was a real bleeding edge story for me because obviously it's kind of, we said before, software is eating the world. Now the LLM is eating software and the world. And I think that's a really exciting evolution.
Yeah, for sure. I think I was following something on a similar theme to yours, Rolf. It's very interesting space. A lot of companies, and not saying this is wrong, but they're putting in a lot of effort to make their software agentic. But this controversial play or argument that I've been following is that the surface area is changing. As to your point, the surface area to utility is changing inside of the models themselves. So there were a few like quite surprising paradigm shifts that I thought were worth considering. That one guy was calling out saying, don't think of it as trying to put AI in your browser, but rather building a browser for your lab, for the lab. And the same with SaaS. He even made another controversy call out saying a prediction saying that the SaaS apocalypse isn't real. It's not going anywhere. Those services will still be required, but that surface area is moving into the labs. So instead of them needing to build agents, he's rather saying you need to start preparing your service to live inside the surfaces of labs, which I thought was quite fascinating. And I think it's a similar theme to what you're saying. Ultimately, the applications are being eaten, but they're being absorbed onto another surface.
Yeah, and maybe this is the thing, we're really kind of focusing on the outcome. So what's the outcome you want? Who cares about how you got there? We've always been so completely enamored with design. And I think design is still important. We want beautiful looking, surfaces, as you put it. Whether you're on a mobile phone or whether you're on staring at your desktop, we definitely want the experience to be interesting and beautiful. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be. But I think so much of what we've done has been a linear progression. And kind of we make a linear way through whatever task it is, submitting your taxes or paying a bill, buying something. And really now what we're seeing with the LLM is it's kind of collapsing all of that. It's kind of going, well, I don't really need to know what the process is. I just need to know what it is you want to achieve. And I'll then design a completely custom path and completely custom software and maybe even completely custom, data and all kinds of processing and logic just to achieve that outcome, which might be as simple as I want to, design a new flugel binder for a shoelace. Flugel binder is the end of a shoelace. I always find that an interesting word. I don't know why you'd want to design a new one for that, but maybe it's time we design a new flugel binder for a shoelace. Nobody's ever built software for that. And, here we go. Anyway, so,
I know exactly what you're referencing. That's from Tom Cruise's cocktail movie.
okay, well, I'm not that old, so
But
don't know what you're talking about. Who's Tom Cruise?
but yeah, we've been guessing for at least 30 minutes. I haven't even dropped into my story. So without further ado, if you don't mind, on the topic of you talking about linear progressions of things, I think the story is more than fitting. Like even today, when we talk to the most advanced AI models, it experiences reality like a walkie-talkie conversation, completely freezing its perception until you finish your sentence. This is more commonly known as turn-based AI, which we're all familiar with by now. According to a fascinating new deep dive by Thinking Machines, this single thread way of processing is creating massive collaboration bottleneck in modern knowledge work. We have been obsessed with building autonomous agents that you can just fire and forget. But the real world work rarely functions that way because humans need to clarify, pivot, and interject. The researchers use a useful analogy trying to collaborate with current turn based AIs like trying to resolve a highly nuanced, crucial disagreement entirely via email instead of just talking it out in person. Rolf, I'm sure you have noticed, as have I, how restricted this can feel at times. Humans are getting pushed out of the loop, not because we lack value, but simply because the rigid AI interface has absolutely no room for our natural communication style. To fix this, Thinking Machines has completely ripped out the standard external harnesses like bolted on voice activity detection that treat human interaction as a bolted on afterthought. Instead, they've engineered native interaction models designed around a continuous stream of time aligned microturns, precisely chopping input and output into fluid 200 millisecond chunks. This unlocks true co presence and simultaneity, meaning an AI can literally watch a video with you, listen to you speak, process your visual cues, and proactively backchannel or interject all at the exact same time. The mechanics essentially rely on a dual system architecture. The fast interaction model stays continuously present with you, while it silently delegates heavy lifting reasoning to an asynchronous background model that can smoothly weave its results back to live chat. The actionable takeaway here is to stop contorting your natural workflow to fit clunky turn based systems and instead look towards these emerging full duplex tools that actually meet human intuition where they naturally live. The era of waiting for the glowing cursor to stop spinning is ending. The future of AI is about working alongside a tool that can finally read the room. Quite excited about this one.
Yeah, of course. And it really kind of feeds beautifully into what will be, hopefully, at some point, another big news item this week, well, this year, and that is ambient AI. So this kind of always on AI that is listening, that is observing, truly omnipotent. We're seeing a little bit of this with the the Meta glasses, the Ray-Bans that you can pick up. There's a lot of these things on the market, but I think that's probably been the most successful form factor so far for being always on, always present. I say that, obviously, we've all had our phones, but people typically try to turn the phone off from kind of listening to every single conversation. Every time I say Google, by the way, my phone turns on and tries to have a conversation. So it's trying to do what you've just described there. But I think the convergence of ambient AI and this concept that you've just described is really where it's going. And I think we'll have to see what role latency has to play, whether it actually is workable. I still spend an awful lot of time interacting with AI and just stand there kind of watching the cursor as it's trying to process. And so I do think that, you know, speed is improving, but also the weight of data that we are sharing, that it's having to interact with, the weight of the memories that it's having to integrate new data with, actually just keeps making the problem bigger and bigger. So I'm not entirely sure that we will ever really crack it. Possibly one day we will. Um, but no doubt this is kind of where we're going, and it should make the conversational AI a lot more interesting, especially, as we increasingly move it to a robot form factor. So people have got lots of robots around them already. And, no doubt for some people, their car is already a robot and they're interacting just fine with that. It's interacting with the environment in a, sub millisecond context. That's why self-driving cars are even a thing. So this isn't really far-fetched. It's just not equally distributed across the form factors that we're interacting with. But I think that's a beautiful point. And maybe, that kind of is a good segue into my next deep dive, which I think, again, is another really interesting kind of bleeding edge moment. And this is for organizations. So as our listeners know, we're listening to and consuming an enormous amount of thought leadership. And Peter Diamandis and Salim Ismail are two people that are always talking about some really interesting concepts with some of the leading minds in this space. And Salim Ismail has just released his third book, Organizational Singularity. And actually, I think he's releasing it as a Claude skill. So it's kind of integrated into Claude. It's going to be an interactive concept that they can also update. But there's some really, really fascinating ideas around this. And the reason why he's written this book now is he's kind of really starting to see that the traditional organization doesn't just have a sell by date, it's past its sell by date. It's growing mold on the shelf, which should send shivers down every CEO and CTO spine. And I think for leaders around the world, it's probably incredibly complex. If you go on YouTube, you will find 10 people telling you why AI is a bubble and it's going to explode and it's going to disappear. And there are doomsayers out there and there are naysayers. And that just creates an awful lot of noise. And then you watch another 10 episodes where people have actually adopted it. But, 95%, if you believe the Boston Consulting Group's analysis on this, 95% of AI projects are yet to deliver any value, which means there are only about 5%, not just of projects, but 5% of companies that are truly extracting benefit. And here you've got Salim Ismail in his book saying, actually, guys, you better watch out, because if you have a business model that can be disrupted by two guys sitting in their bedroom building open claw automations, then guess what? That is why you're past your sell by date, because somebody is probably automating your business somewhere right now. And this will obviously come to, anything that is high margin in particular. So anything to do with research, for example, anything where you've got, the opportunity to outsource. I think this is where people will be building what they call vertical solutions. So what we've said in 2026 is the year of vertical AI. This is where we go from general application of AI to models that have been really optimized for specific activities. And what we know is that the the frontier labs are all after the research vertical. This is why we've seen DeepMind releasing their new research tool. But we've had announcements in the last 6 months from OpenAI. Also, actually disrupting that space quite significantly, and so this is vertical AI. We've had a lot of stories about the advent of AI in healthcare. We've had a lot of stories about law and kind of solutions that are specifically optimized, for those use cases. And so this is kind of where it's going. And I think, if you are thinking that it's only going to disrupt healthcare and legal work or research, then I think this is where you've potentially, got a bit of a blind spot, because I think, in my own work, I am focusing heavily on retail. I am focusing heavily on AI in store retail. I'm focusing heavily on AI in sourcing and supply chain. And so I know that, when I work with Claude, for example, it doesn't have specific solutions that are optimized for retail, but I am building those solutions in Claude. And so I think this is kind of where homegrown vertical application of AI, is a great opportunity for anybody that has got deep experience in a particular area. And it really doesn't matter, what it is. It could literally be janitorial work. There's no doubt in my mind that if you are a cleaner and you have a really great idea of how your work could be automated, and this is probably more in terms of actually just things like what your schedule is and what you're cleaning where, who's cleaning it, how you're allocating resources to it, what supplies you've got, and what's actually in the supply cupboard. So all of that stuff, you might think as a cleaner, how can AI help me? Well, I think it could automate all of that, even to the point of continuously searching for the best priced mop head out there, so that you are always stocking the cupboard with the best price cleaning products. That is accessible. I know it's a bit of a ridiculous example, but it's entirely accessible, and it's a good example of vertical AI. And I think this is what Salim Ismail is kind of getting at, the organizational singularity. And just some of the quotes I think that kind of stood out there was obviously the one, two guys with open claw are your threat model. And the other one is, right now it's easier to build the feature. Well, it's actually building the feature is cheaper than having the meeting. And so that's another interesting evolution that I'm even experiencing in my own work. So often, we want to go and prove the MVP. We build a bit of software. We say we have to have test cases. We have to test this with customers and see if they like it. Today, rather than having those conversations internally with the dev team, often, or even, just with the client, it's sometimes cheaper to build it and show them than it is to have the conversation about what is it that you need. I mean, and I believe that, and I'm seeing that day in, day out in my work, that it is absolutely cheaper to build it and show them and hopefully inspire them with something that's already working, rather than imagine what this could look like. That model is gone. And so if you are a product manager, if you're a business analyst, if you're a project manager, I think, that's definitely should be shaping the way that you are working.
And
But
Rolf, that actually aligns quite neatly to how we started the year off. If you recall, we had a similar discussion saying how much business has changed that, you can't walk into a room and show a BRD anymore. People want to see a working demo. It's the same theme, just playing out more and more.
yeah, and I think, the BRD, the business requirements document, is still very much something that you should be creating. You shouldn't take the shortcut and not write it. But now, it's about writing a first version of it, then actually, using your AI tools to do a benchmark against the best solutions or the best companies in the market that you aspire to beat, and very quickly building out a BRD, unlike anything that anybody has ever written before manually, and doing that in 10 minutes as opposed to, 2, 3, 4, 5 months worth of research. And obviously that is now very much possible. And I think the final quote that really stuck with me around what Salim was saying in his book is that future organizations will be architected around intelligence, not hierarchy. And this is really a fundamental concept. Now, do I agree that organizations are wholly organized around hierarchy? In part, I think organizations have actually been organized around network. So I did a lot of work around organizational network analysis. And really what that, basically gives us is that the best network wins. So it's the organization in your company and the way that people's relationships actually drive them to interact with each other that gets work done. It's not really the hierarchy. The hierarchy is just, what you get promoted to, but how work gets done is based on the relationships that you have. And so I think he's potentially kind of missed that step. I think hierarchies was the kind of model of the 80s. Networks we started to really start to understand, in the 90s, and certainly we've started to really understand them in terms of the science of work over the last 15 years. Now, organizing around intelligence, I do think he's absolutely right there. That is the next step. And so organization, I think the next evolution is networked intelligence. And so, maybe we need to write a book on that, Emil. And just to
Speaking of
say,
books, I did catch that Moonshot episode. It was interesting, Rolf. One thing that stood out on me with that skill he's created, he's saying what's different is because AI is moving so fast, the skill essentially makes the book a living document, so it adapts as the news changes. I thought that was kind of cool.
yes, I think this is kind of the way that all books will be written in the future. They're kind of a pattern to share, innovation and the latest thinking and really use cases that obviously are very much focused, on a theme. Maybe we are redefining what it means to write a book these days. I don't know. I mean, I look at my kids and they don't want to pick up a book that has physical front and back cover with pages. They do read a lot, but they certainly don't read that form factor anymore. And so maybe it does, lend itself very well. I mean, there's something romantic about reading a book. I still love picking up a book, but the younger generation certainly isn't there. So I think I did say that was probably like the last one of my quotes from the book, but actually there's another one that I really loved. You can't fix an existing system. You have to build a new system at the edge. We love that. Anything at the edge is where we want to be. I really think for organizations, it means kind of not necessarily a skunk works, but imagine that, your digital twin. Your digital twin is your opportunity to reimagine your organization as a fully AI native, architecture. And I think every organization should be looking to disrupt itself in that way and basically setting up their digital twin. I mean, the complexity is astounding, especially, for enterprise business, but, certainly it's kind of where it's going. And I guess when execution is nearly free, judgment and taste become the moat. What does that mean? I don't actually know, but I do know that it's kind of rooted in culture. I think it's the way we do things around here that, it's the ethics of it. You even mentioned Hermes and just you kind of really liked their ethos. And so I think this is what it comes into. You either like the way people do it, you like the sound of it, you like the smell of it, you like the look of it. You might not even be able to put your finger on why, but you buy into it. It's the reason why a lot of people love our show. They don't even know why, but they just know it feels right. And I think that's what's so exciting about, where all of this is going. It's really about building culture and the experience at the heart of it. So there you go.
Absolutely. I've got another story for us, Rolf. This is more, it's a word of warning and just some support for those that are security conscious. If you've ever used npm install, which I'm sure all of us have, for anything like npm install in8n or Vercel or HTTP server or TypeScript, the list goes on and on, then this story is definitely worth listening to. So what is npm? It stands for Node Packaging Manager, which is an official software registry and command line tool for Node.js. So it's a pretty big deal. And Axios, which is a popular HTTP library, gets over 100 million downloads a week. So it's a lot of machines, and this matters. This was hijacked by a hacker dropping a self-erasing remote access Trojan onto developer machines in just 1.1 seconds without touching a single source file. Axios essentially acts as hidden plumbing for the internet. and the attacker compromised the lead maintainer's long-lived NPM access token, gaining keys to the kingdom to poison release branches 1.14.1 and 0.30.4. What makes it so sophisticated is stealth. Instead of injecting malicious code into the project's 86 source files, it simply adds one innocent looking dependency called crypto.js to the package registry. And this automated script bypasses standard CI CD guardrails to trigger a dropper file hidden behind 2 layers of obfuscation. Once triggered, the script automatically detects whether the machine is running Mac, Windows, or Linux, contacts the CT server, and proceeds to install RAT, which is a remote access token. And within 1.1 seconds, the malware raises its own setup file and swaps it with a clean package document and leaves zero trace of the breach. I think it would be prudent to check your machines to see if you're exposed to these specific branches. And if you were, it would be wise to treat your machine as compromised and follow best practice, which would be to rotate your API keys, credentials, and tokens. This is a stark reminder that modern software development involves trusting over 2,000 strangers with code execution. So stay safe.
That's just terrified the life out of me. But
Sorry, but we've all been hit. It is limited branches, just by way of reminder. It's 1.14.1 and 0.30.4. So check that out. If you don't have it, you should be good.
yeah, and it's a kind of a beautiful reminder. So actually, I spent so much time over the last 2 weeks really honing in on security protocols. And so I have built quite a successful security review process on top of an already successful security review process. So I need to check whether it's taking that one into account. But thanks for scaring the life out of us, Emil. It's always a bit of great to have a bit of fear to motivate you to go and do some work. Awesome. Well, I think at this point, let's move to something fun. Actually, I
Yeah.
wouldn't mind just sharing my screen, because what we have now got for the show is a bit of a resource that people can go away and see. I'm going to just share my screen over here. So this is the bleeding edge AI.versal.app website that is actually our tool for doing all of the research on this show. And so if you want to go and have a look, you will be able to follow this link. You can actually see we have got all of the show notes for every one of the episodes that we've ever done. On there are all the bonus content. So if we have a look at this week, you can actually see some of the top 5 stories that we've been talking through, as well as a whole breakdown of the big news stories. Meta cuts 8,000 staff on the screen. God, they're forever cutting 8,000 staff. I didn't talk about that one because I couldn't quite verify whether that was the same as the last time they cut 8,000 staff. But is there anybody left at Meta? Anyways, so I think some really interesting resources over there if you want to get into a deeper set of the news that we're not able to cover here. One of the other things I will also just briefly show everybody, we've got articles. So basically, whenever we do a deep dive or we find something really interesting, we have got a very powerful research protocol that goes off and takes a look at that particular news item. And what it does is it kind of takes a little bit of a different approach, because one of the things that I've done is I've said, give me this news, not just from the perspective of the news, but actually take a look at it from the perspective of the CEO or the CTO, as well as the transformation lead. So you will see some of the articles actually have that format. I'm kind of looking here now for the one that did that, and I can't actually find it. So no doubt we'll take a look at that in one of the future episodes, because we will start featuring these deep dives. And it just got a really nice breakdown of what CEOs, CTOs, and transformation leads should be taking into account. But one of the things we are also doing is we are basically giving you a rundown of how AI is evolving. So the AI timeline is a little app that basically allows you to go in and monitor what's happened in terms of the latest news on the timeline. So it runs from 1950 all the way to present day. So you can basically follow the evolution of AI. Basically since its inception to right up to what's happening today. So it's kind of interesting because I think there's just so much news. We kind of lose the ability to reflect on actually where has all of this come from, how fast it's all moved. And of course, every now and then we do a deep dive on a particular model, and we'll be using this tool to basically help you just map out exactly how they have evolved over the last few years. And so the latest there is Anthropic hitting 30 billion in annual recurring revenue. Obviously, it's going to be updated as of the 29th of May. So that has actually run in the background, but I'm just waiting to publish it. So, yeah, go in and take a look at that resource. We are not tracking absolutely every AI company, but we are tracking the ones that matter. And so, as you can see here, there's a bit of a resource on the Frontier Labs. And what we do there is we just benchmark them against each other, just in terms of annual recurring revenue, their overall valuation. And there's also a really interesting little table that you can interact with. So if you are doing any research on the frontier models and wanting to evaluate how they're performing, then this is the one-stop shop that you'll be able to go and take a look at that research. So definitely use that as a resource. This is what we're using for our show. And obviously, I think one of the things that we will be doing is using this to test out various new technologies and automations. So there is an open invitation for you, Emil, to build a Hermes automation that we can showcase on the site. Right now, all of this is being generated by various Claude skills, as well as research protocols that I have evolved over the last year with both ChatGPT and with Claude. And so where we are keen to add some additional tools into the mix so that we can use this to really showcase some of the capabilities. And one of the things we will be doing is also sharing some of those projects live on this particular resource. And that brings me to one very exciting project that I've spoken about
Before we
many
do, Rolf, I
times
just
on the Bleeding.
sorry, that site is looking really slick. Kudos to all the efforts. I just absolutely love it. It's just got a lovely look and feel to it, and it's got really useful, insightful value add aspects to it. I definitely recommend people check it out. And I just absolutely love the different lenses you have for roles for a news item. That's, that really cuts through the chase and gives you what you need depending on what level you are at within the AI industry. So thank you for those efforts.
Yeah, and it's only going to get better. And so, as I said, we will be launching a new projects resource on there as well, and just tracking some of our experiences with practical implementation of AI, stuff that we can really share. And one of the things I will be doing is actually, showcasing just exactly how we have stood up the research protocol and the automatic publishing to that website. I think it's a capability that every individual entrepreneur and certainly every business needs. And so we'll be exposing some of the tech behind that. But one of my other long running projects, which will also be showcased on there, is obviously to do with music. As you know, I've been experimenting with, can you create a record label with AI? And the milestone that I hit basically about a week ago was one of my songs for the alpaca farm was actually showcased and played on Spanish TV. So that's very exciting. And we're hoping that, yeah, it's really cool. There's also some talk of, potentially some of this stuff ending up on Netflix. I can't say too much about that, but there is, I guess it's just really interesting to see the stuff flows like water when you start collaborating with all kinds of people, and music is just such an interesting medium. So I have still only made a grand $6 in terms of cash that's kind of come inbound. I think my costs are still sitting somewhere around $200. So there's a pretty big net loss. Don't go giving up your day job and building music with AI. But I am starting to see actually that there are ways that you can start to monetize this. It's still a massive amount of effort when you look at generating music videos. You could take a look at some of my music videos on YouTube. Just type in Ralph Benker. It's on my own personal channel. You'll see some of the music videos that I've created there as part of this test. And you will also be able to go and listen to some of the music that I've created on SoundCloud and also again under Ralph Benker. Shortly, I will be doing some efforts to actually push stuff to Spotify. Are a few things on Spotify as well, but only a handful. That's just been too much effort, and I haven't been able to get on top of that with all of the client work we've got going on. But nonetheless, a really, really superb use case for practical use of AI, just in terms of content generation, in terms of integration with a variety of platforms, in terms of video generation, and then obviously just seeing how these things actually monetize. So, and all of that we're doing as an experiment to try to help all of this come to life for everyday people and just show them what's accessible to them in terms of automation, in terms of content production, and in terms of monetization. So watch the space on that. We're going to be doing a bit more work on just how we make those projects available to you. And yep, so I think those are probably all of the stories that we have time for today. You want to go in for one more, Emil?
Just a short one, and congratulations on viewing on national television. I'd love to check that out if you have a link to. But yeah, for the last story, Rolf, is 11 labs have adopted Google's SynthID, baking in an inescapable watermark into every generated voice and instantly killing thousands of faceless channels overnight. YouTube has actually been telegraphing this move since July 2025, when they rebranded their repetitious content policy to target inauthentic material. Creators treating AI as a completely automated shortcut ignored the writing on the wall, wrongly betting that the platform lacked the infrastructure to enforce its own rules. And SynthID is not a fragile metadata tag you can simply strip out. It's an interperceptible signal embedded directly into the audio waveform, joining a system that has already tagged over 100 billion pieces of media from OpenAI and NVIDIA. It specifically closes the analog hole, meaning the algorithm still catches the AI signature even if you're subject to the file with aggressive MP3 compression, heavy editing, or even if you play it through a physical speaker and re-record it, the ID is still there. So it looks like you cannot convert or hack your way out of this cross-industry net. The message seems to be to start building content that relies heavily on your unique perspective, because genuine human input is the only asset this watermark cannot touch.
Gosh, so we're safe on the bleeding edge. Thank goodness for that. You get really authentic content here. But yeah, I think that's a really welcome evolution. I think this is really the opportunity. I think it's great. We don't want people not expressing their own opinions. That is just going to lead to the dead internet theory where everything is rehashed. And I think obviously, creativity is about building and being inspired by others, but it's about adding that nuance. And I hope that's certainly what we bring to the AI news on this show. So with that, I think that's a wrap, Emil.
It is a wrap, but I'm just going to add two more news items because I thought these were quite incredible. Well, really interesting as far as the market's concerned. Is Uber CEO is heavy with his AI spending, and he's saying it's getting harder to justify as higher token usage fails to show clear payoffs in consumer features. And more specifically, I think the biggest news item for me this week has been a recent news update from Polymarket that an AI consultant reveals that a client accidentally spent $500 million on tokens in a single month after failing to set employee limits on Claude usage. That figure is correct, 500 million. Oof. And I looked into the legal aspects, and it looks like they likely will have to pay the bill.
My word. And that's, again, that you've just terrified the life out of me. So actually, what I'm going to say is with AWS, one of the reasons why you might want to run your Claude code accounts and corporate usage in AWS is because Well, I say you can actually set limits on this. There has been a case of somebody where certain things aren't tracked, and so you have to be very careful with the way you set that up. But I think, yeah, I mean, we've had so many stories over the last year or so of people being caught out by massive token bills, and so there's really something there to make sure it's constrained. And even with AWS, so I did read a story where they said, yes, only kind of certain things are managed by their dashboard where you can kind of go away and set these limits. Other things, you kind of have to go away and set somewhere else. Presumably that will all become a lot easier because, you know, clearly people are going to go bankrupt if they're getting bills like that. But on that note, that's a real kind of banger of a story. Thank you very much for listening. We are hugely appreciative to our audience, and we'll see you on the edge. Emil, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Can't wait to see you next week.
Adios.